Hey, what's up? This is Václav. So, I'm revisiting parts of my home automation kit I did over the last 5 years. They're becoming obsolete. I'm refactoring them to bring them up to date with the current state of development. I made an overview of what's coming and why. If you didn't see it, the link is in the common corner. So with that, I can get straight to it. So I'm making 2 videos about that. Today, I will revisit the irrigation controller that is made of Sonoff 4-channel Pro with an ITEAD color display. This is quite a popular project on the internet. And I'm not going to change the solution architecture overall. The hardware will still stay and it will still run ESPHome as it is today. But I will update that one to use the ESPHome native sprinkler controller. And I will show you 3 different flavors of this. Now, the second project is similar. It's with time-based shades actuators. That one was made in Arduino and I moved that one to ESPHome, and I'm making a separate video about this one to keep the videos focused. So, the sprinkler controller. This is a new addition to the last ESPHome release. The way it works is you create a controller and you can add a number of valves or zones to it represented by ESPHome switches. Then you can launch the program and it will automatically cycle through all the zones. Or you can run individual valves one by one if you want, or you can even create a custom queues and run it forward or in reverse or multiple times. So you can play with that. The beauty of that is you can configure a lot of parameters. You can configure a run duration for each valve, but also a multiplier for the whole controller or for each valve, for example, based on the soil moisture, weather, or time of the year. You can also enable or disable individual zones. One of the great features it has is that you can configure a pump switch across the controller or for each valve. So that will automatically start the pump at the beginning of the cycle and stop it at the end. And I actually use it, not for a pump, but I added a solenoid valve that shuts off the water supply so that it is not under pressure when it's not used. And it's drained and blocked in the winter. Then you can configure and adjust delays or overlaps, to adjust the timing of the individual valves and the pump. And that can be used if the irrigation uses pressure to control the thing and to avoid banging if you have longer lines. I don't use it and I will not show it to you, but you know it can be added very simply. Just check the documentation and you can just add it on. It also supports latching valves that need pulse control. Again, I'm not gonna use it, but it's very easy. It's just one line of config. You can just add it. Now in this video, I will configure one controller, but you could also configure multiple controllers on a single device. So if you have different parts of a garden that each have different zones and sequences and run separately, you could do that as well. It's all nicely documented on the ESPHome site. So I'm not going to explain each individual parameters, but let me show you what I did, what I used, and how it changed from what it was before. So first, what was used before? So it was completely custom solution that was using global variables that were used as timers. So I had 4 global variables that were used to count the remaining time, and there were 4 other global variables that were used for the duration, so as an initial value for the timers. And then there was a script, so when the valve was open, so there was a GPIO relay here, there were switches, one for each valve. And when it was turned on, it will set the remaining time to the value of the duration. So these are the 2 variables that you saw before. And then there was an interval, which was every 5 seconds, looking at the state of the relay. And if the relay was on, it was decrementing the remaining time by the 5 seconds. And if the time reached 0, it will shut off the valve. So this is where we're coming from. Now, what has changed? So all the global variables for the duration and for the timers, and the interval, checking the state of the valves every 5 seconds and decrementing the timers, it's all gone. We don't need that anymore. It's been all replaced by this sprinkler controller. It's got an ID because we use it in scripting and automation from the physical buttons to initiate the cycles or start the individual valves. I'm gonna get to that. And then what it has is it's got auto advanced switch configured, so we will see that from the Home Assistant screen. And then it's got those 4 valves. Each valve has this relay, so those relays are the GPIO switches as before. And each of those valves, they have a name configured, so I could see that on the Home Assistant screen. And they have a default duration, and we can change that if we want to. So with this, I'll be able to control that from the Home Assistant, trigger it by automation, for example, at specific time, and start the irrigation cycle. So that's all it needs, those 15 lines of code. But I want to do more, right? I would like to still be able to control it manually from the Sonoff by the buttons. So for that, I still have the GPIO binary sensor. And from these, I would like to toggle the valves. I would like to turn them on and off. But the valves are now managed by the controller. We wouldn't turn them on and off manually because the controller wouldn't know what's going on. But the controller doesn't have any toggle operation, turn it on and off. In fact, maybe it does, but if I would do it, I would start the whole controller. But here I'm targeting the individual valve, which is represented by the button. So what I'm doing here is, if the valve is off, I'm not starting the whole cycle, but I am starting a single valve program. So I'd like to turn this single valve on, and it will then automatically turn off after the duration time has expired. So this is what I'm doing when the valve is off. When the valve was on, then I'd like to turn it off, right? So here I'm just shutting down the sprinkler controller. So these are the buttons. Then we also have the display. And in here what I'm doing is I'm checking each button, and if it's on, then I'm gonna read the remaining time from the controller, and the remaining time variable will show the remaining time of the currently running valve. And if there is a remaining time, then I'm gonna just format it and display it on the ITEAD display. Now, if you've noticed, in the old design, I was always refreshing all the values. So every 5 seconds, I was either showing the time or I was setting the value to empty string. I have changed that a little bit, so I'm only updating the display when I have to update it. But then what I have done is, when the relay turns off, I'm going to set the text to an empty string based on the state change. So I don't keep updating it every 5 seconds, but I only do it when the cycle is finished. The same thing I do with the sensor values. So I have the sensors for the rain today, rain in the last 3 days, and whether the irrigation has run in the last 24 hours. And I'm only setting that when the sensor value as received through the API from Home Assistant is updated. So with that, the display is much easier. I'm only using it to update the remaining time every 5 seconds if the valve is open. Then I also have the buttons on the Nextion. So there is a button to launch a irrigation program. And I used to have that before as well, but what it is, I was calling a script inside Home Assistant. So Home Assistant was taking care of sequencing the valves and the timing, and it was running them one by one. I don't need to do it anymore. So when I push the button, I'm only calling sprinkler start full cycle with the controller, and it'll do everything automatically on the device. I have a second program that I don't use for the full cycle. So what I'll do in here is I will set up a queue. I will put there 2 valves, so the first and second valve, each for 900 seconds. And then I will start the sprinkler queue from there. So to summarize, it has greatly simplified the configuration of the controller. but it has a little bit complicated the configuration of those GPIO switches because I can't just toggle it. And I'm also missing the possibility to set up the timers. In the original design, I had an API set up with services that allow me to set the times. But wait, I have a advanced configuration where I'm addressing both of those issues. So first, I have created a file where I have concentrated few helper functions, if you will. So this whole reading of the remaining time and formatting it and showing it in the right format, I have created a function for it. So I can then just call set component text, sprinkler time, and then the remaining time of the controller. So it makes it much easier to what you have in here. So it's much shorter, completely optional. And I have done the same with the binary sensors. So as you know, previously, I used to have this whole logic. If this switch is off, do this, otherwise do that. I have greatly simplified it. I just call toggle, relay, and controller. And I have created a function in here that is doing the logic in the file. So it doesn't do anything different. I have just simplified it, so I have it on one line. To use those helpers, you need to take this irrigation.h file and you need to copy it in your Home Assistant config in the ESPHome directory. And then this file is then a reference by the configuration script in the ESPHome section. There is an extra line, includes irrigation.h, so this is the name of the file. And then those helpers are available for you to use. So these are cosmetic changes, but more importantly, I set up those numbers in here that allow me to control the duration from the Home Assistant. So there are 4 numbers with the durations. And what they do is they return the current valve duration. And when I set it from Home Assistant, I call function set valve run duration. So if I go to the devices and I search for it, this is how it shows on the device page. So you can see the 4 numbers with the durations in here, and they show the actual current duration that is set up on the device. And if I change that, it'll automatically change it on the device. And then I have those 4 valves, and I can turn them on to start the single valve program from the Home Assistant. Or I can turn this switch on, the grass, which is going to start full cycle, basically turning sequentially all of those 3 switches. I say 3, not 4, because what I do have is I actually have 2 controllers configured on my device. I'll show you in a second. One for what I call the grass, and then I have a separate one with sockets that are normally not used in the full cycle. So I have 2 different controllers set up on a single device. So what's the big deal? If I graphically would like to show you what has changed. So in this file, you could see everything which is shown red has been removed and everything which is shown green has been changed or added. And you could see clearly that this whole globals section has been removed. We don't need it anymore. As well as here in the back, this interval section, which was pretty much running the whole logic and driving the controller. This is not necessary anymore. We don't have it. We have also removed all of those services that were setting up the timers, and in the advanced script it has been replaced by the numbers, but we don't need to call any services for that. This is all done seamlessly. I've also greatly improved the display. It has nothing to do with the irrigation controller as such, but I do it much better now. I only update the timers when I need to. And I have moved the actual updates to the actual sensor, so they're only updated when they change. And finally, the old solution was relying on Home Assistant services, and now it can be done natively by the device. So this is a summary of all the major changes. So these are the 2 versions I shared on the GitHub. I guess one is easy to understand, the other one is easy to use and kind of neat. Now, What I use is 90% similar to the second one, to the advanced config, but there are a few further customizations I made. And the reason I didn't add them to the GitHub is I think it's a little bit too specific and it's making it a little bit too complicated for general use. But let me show that to you anyhow, and in case you like it, you can get inspired. So briefly, what is different on my actual implementation? As I said, it's a little bit more complex. But what I did is I have used push buttons for the actual sprinklers on the display. So it'll show when the valve is open, it'll show it on the display, and I can also push the button to initiate the single valve operation from there as well. So it's kind of redundant to the physical buttons on the side of the Sonoff 4-channel. But for example, if you use other platform, if you don't use the Sonoff 4-channel and you would like to control it from the display, this is what you can do. So what I do is when the ESPHome is started on boot, I'm actually reading the state of the different relays, and I'm setting the value of the 4 buttons accordingly. And I also mentioned I use a pump, which is in fact a solenoid valve that shuts down the water coming into the irrigation on and off. So I'm refreshing that initially on the state as well. But I do not control this pump directly from this device. This is controlled by another device connected to Home Assistant. So what I have done with that is I have configured this binary sensor connected through the Home Assistant platform, so through the API. And then I'm showing state of this pump on the display as well. So when the state changes, I will update this button on the display from active to inactive when the state changes. And when I push the button, then I have a switch in here. When I push the button, then I will control the solenoid valve accordingly. But to do that, I need to configure a switch for the water pump, because in here this was only a binary sensor that was showing the current state. So I have configured a switch, and I use a template switch, and the template switch to return the state, it's actually using this binary sensor in here. So it's reading this binary sensor to return the state, and then we'd like to turn it on or turn it off, and then I call the Home Assistant service to turn it on and off. So it's a little bit complicated. It would have been much easier if I would control the solenoid directly from the device, but as I said, it's from different part of a house, so I do it through Home Assistant. So it's a little bit cumbersome, which is the reason I did not include it in the template, because it would make it confusing and too complicated. So that's the pump, and here in the sprinkler, I mentioned I have 2 controllers, so one for the grass and one for the sockets, and in each of those I'm actually using this pump switch. So this is the ID of the switch I was just showing. So when the valve opens, it'll automatically open the solenoid valve and lets the water inside the irrigation. So this is another change in here. So where was I? I was talking about the buttons, the binary buttons that I like to show the state, and I like to also use it to turn on and off the valve. So I have here the switches for the 4 buttons, and this is a Nextion platform button. So this is the touchscreen button. This is the component name, and what it does is if I turn it on, I will call this conditional on. You remember we have created this helper function. So it's checking whether the relay is off, and if it's off, then it'll turn it on. And if it's on, it'll shut down the controller. And then to update the state of the button, what I do is when the actual relay changes the state, I do not only show the time, but I also update the state of this button. So when I turn on, the valve, it'll set the value of this button to 1, and when it turns off, I will set it to 0, which is what got me into trouble initially. I spent quite some time troubleshooting it because it's kind of creating positive loop. I'm setting the button here on and off, and then I'm here running a script when it turns on and off. So what happened is when I set it on in here, it'll call this function, and then in this function I started a single valve operation. So if it was turned on as part of a full cycle operation, this button would actually override it, and it'll automatically start a single valve operation. At the same time, when it turns off, it'll shut down the controller here anyhow. Initially, I set it simply to turn the valve on when the button turned on and shut down the controller when it turned off. And then I spent a day trying to figure out why the cycle didn't work and always ended up after the first zone. I thought the sprinkler controller is rubbish, and then I figured it's me being stupid. When the first zone finished, it turned off the Nextion binary switch and it shut down the controller. You get it, right? So this single cosmetic change I wanted made it quite a bit more complicated. I'm thinking about a theory of diminishing results now, which is the reason why I didn't include that in the GitHub, because then you would probably say this is unnecessary, too much work for very little benefit. So to finish it, I have done one more thing. I've created an API so I can start different programs directly from the Home Assistant. And for that, I have created scripts. So there is actually one script which is essentially starting full cycle. So I didn't have to create a script because this is a single command. But anyhow, I have created a second script which is adding those two valves into the queue and then starting the queue. So this way I could create, using the scripts, different custom programs, so it's kind of neat. Finally, I added an additional screen with the weather forecast and temperatures, because it's quite convenient for me in the place where it is. It's really taken from the weather station display that is also posted on the GitHub, and it works for me, but I didn't really add it to the project because there's nothing to do with the irrigation control. But at least you can see, you can use it as a puzzle and take parts and just add them and combine them. So what do you say? Do you like it? I have updated the project on the GitHub, and so you can steal it there. And with that, I will end the video here, but you can continue in the next one with the ESPHome window blinds. Bye.